I want to speak to all of you today about the downtrodden, the disposable, the unnoticed. I want to talk to you today about tonsils. I remember the first time I noticed the prejudice against tonsils. I had a friend who had gone to the hospital to have his tonsils removed, and I was going to his home afterwards to check on him. As I walked into his home, I don't know exactly what I expected to see. I think I expected his head covered in, a bandage. Maybe his entire upper torso covered in a bandage. Maybe that bandage was tinted red by all the blood he had lost. I expected his head upheld in a tourniquet, him lethargic from the pain meds. I walked in, and there he sat in the recliner, and he said, "Hey, Preston, want some ice cream?" And I thought this surgery thing could be a lot worse. I said, "Do you miss your tonsils?" And he said, "No, why would I miss my tonsils?" I said, "What do tonsils do anyway?" And he said, "Nothing." And I said, "No, really, what do your tonsils do?" And he said, "Nothing." And I don't know about you, but I just don't believe that one bit. I don't think God would give us one body part that doesn't do something. Why would God give us a part that does nothing? It just seems a little off to me. I wouldn't be surprised if in the future we learn differently. I wouldn't be surprised if in the future we learn that our tonsils are what control the temperatures in our mouths. And therefore, given all the political discourse and all the talk in our country today, global warming is really the result of a generation of people who have no tonsils. That's what I think. When science has its day. I'm pretty sure, I read this online, so you know it's true. I'm pretty sure that our tonsils are connected to the parts of our brain that control our communication, which is why we're more comfortable tweeting than talking. Don't get mad at your youth. You took their tonsils out. That's why they can't talk anymore. I have a feeling that many of our issues today, conflicts around the world, hunger, disease, will one day be traced back to a generation of people who had no tonsils. Someone thought one day we don't need our tonsils. And then somebody said, what about our appendix? We don't need our appendix. And the spleen? Has anyone asked the spleen how the spleen feels about 1 Corinthians 12? We think we have expendable body parts today. This is the sort of thing Paul's talking about here, the body and the parts. He's talking about the parts working as a whole. We don't see much of this in our culture today, our individualistic culture, but when we do see it, it's a very powerful thing to behold. I think it's why many people in our culture enjoy watching team sports like basketball and football. It's not always the team with the best player. It's not even the team that has the most talent in many cases. It's about the teamwork, the execution of the many players working together, the sum of the parts functioning as a whole. I think that's why we enjoy choirs and orchestras, why the church throughout its history has sung the gospel communally rather than individually. To be sure, there are many wonderful voices and instruments. We have those throughout our congregation. But when a group gets together and sings together, when a group plays together, when a cacophony of individuals becomes a symphony of voices, there is something mysteriously powerful in that moment. I think that's why we appreciate works of art. The colors, the shapes, the shading, the brush strokes, the canvas, all cooperating in a synergy to convey an idea or a point or a feeling. It's powerful when parts work together in a concert that make up the whole. And they participate in something they couldn't on their own. There's a beauty and a power when parts become a whole. Of course, there's something inherently difficult about that as well. We've all observed teams that underachieved because the individual talent never gelled or because their execution couldn't overcome their egos. We've all seen bad art when one facet of the work was incongruent with the other facets of the work. We've all heard mediocre choirs that were tough on the ears, much less the mind and the heart. We've all observed individuals that could never quite buy into the group, parts that somehow never synergized with the whole. We've all seen it. And then there's the church at Corinth. To say that the church at Corinth was dysfunctional is an understatement. On one occasion, I heard they were without a pastor for 4 years because no one in his right mind would go pastor that congregation. We know from this particular letter there were scores of things wrong with the congregation. One man in the church and his stepmom were caught in an immoral relationship. There were other counts of sexual immorality that the church seemed to be proud of. There were lawsuits between members of the church, and on one occasion a huge argument about whether or not it was right to eat meat that had been sacrificed on the altar to Aphrodite the day before. Can we do that or can't we do that? Big church eruption, business meeting and all. There were disagreements about how men and women should dress in the church. And when they observed the Lord's Supper, they had a big meal beforehand, and the rich folks who didn't have to work showed up early and ate all the food and drank all the wine. And then when the blue-collar folks got off at 5 and showed up, all the food had been eaten and the wine had been drunk, and the rich were full and drunk, and the poor were hungry with nothing to drink. And Paul says, don't do communion. That's not communion. It's silly to participate in communion when there is no communion. Those kinds of things all the time. Parts only concerned about their part. And then there was the issue of spiritual gifts in chapter 12. The Corinthians, it seems, elevated some gifts above others. They saw some as more important. And they felt as though some gifts gave one a special status before God. These gifts were indications of God's supreme favor on this particular person. If someone did not possess a certain gift, they were disrespected and degraded. And so the Corinthians expected a certain homogeneity in the gifts. They expected all the gifts to look alike. Can you imagine what church would be like if all our gifts were alike? Can you imagine if we just had 300 eyes at Second Baptist Church? How boring that would be, how useless that would be. 300 eyes does not a church body make. In fact, the grand irony of things is if all you have are eyes, you still can't see. You have to have a brain and all to be able to see. In an ironic twist, the giftedness of the people had exacerbated the chasms and divisions in the church rather than healed the chasms and divisions in the church. Ultimately, Paul corrects them by reminding them of the source of all their diverse gifts. The same Spirit which gave birth to the church is the Spirit that gives the various gifts that make church happen. Spiritual gifts are just that. They're gifts. And they're given because the Spirit is a great giver, not because we're worthy recipients. They're gifts of grace, not gifts of merit. And therefore, we're less owners of them than we are stewards of them. And these gifts are diverse because the church's mission and ministries are varied and diverse. There are many diverse gifts, and each person in the church has 1 or 2 or 10 of them. But all these various gifts come from the same Spirit. They have a common source. And not only do our gifts have a common source, they have a common aim. The Spirit gives each of us gifts for the good of the whole body. Not for bragging rights, not for personal benefit, not even for self-fulfillment and actualization. That's not it. The gifts given to each of us are for all of us. Your gift belongs to everyone, not just you. And my gift belongs to everyone, not just me. The best gifts are meant to be shared. And so while we are diverse in gifts and talents, we are unified in our purpose and in the name of the one who gave them to us. And if our aim is right, we will experience diversity in unity. One of my favorite people on the planet is a member of my former church in Oklahoma City. His name's Monty Klepper. Monty is a really good golfer. He wins most tournaments he enters, and he's even taught golf on a couple of occasions. One day, shortly after I arrived at Spring Creek, he said, "Preston, do you play golf?" And I said, "No, not exactly." And I could see the pain in his eyes. And I think something in him died when I said that. And so we both agreed that at some point in the future, he and I would go to the driving range and he would teach me how to play golf. So the day came. We went out there and I swung my club as hard as I could, and the ball trickled a few feet in front of me. I swung again as hard as I could, and the ball skimmied across the ground, worm burner and all. I hit a slice so bad I nearly decapitated a poor soul just down the way, and the golfers who were there started looking and staring and whispering, and I could see that Monty was embarrassed. And no pastor wants their congregation to be ashamed of them, you know. It's bad enough when y'all are ashamed of me on Sunday mornings, but not Tuesday afternoons. I don't want y'all to be ashamed of me on Tuesday afternoons. And so I said to Monty, let's just go. And he said, hey, hang on. And he adjusted my grip just a bit. And he adjusted my stance just a bit. And he said, hit one. And I hit it, and it went straight. I'd never seen that before. And then I hit another one, and it rose from the earth as if heaven bound. And my head began to expand, and my pride began to mount. Watch out, Tiger Woods, I thought. By the way, thinking of Tiger Woods, has anyone checked his tonsils of late? It's been a while since he's won a tournament. I bet when he left for rehab so many months ago, somebody messed with his tonsils. I bet that's it. Finally, after an hour of steady improvement, Monty said, okay, one more. And I hit one more. And it ascended. And the angels began to sing. And the ball flew through the air with this powerful gentility, as if on angels' wings. And it landed in the grand distance, straight. I dropped my club in the bag and began to walk off, as proud of myself as I have ever been. And Monty, right behind me, said, not bad for the first day, not bad for the first day. And he said, next time we'll aim at something. Yeah. Next time we'll aim at something. I hadn't aimed the whole time. I had been swinging these clubs as hard as I could. I had not aimed one time. There never was a next time, by the way, with Monty. At what are you aiming? I'm not asking you if you're swinging. I'm asking you if you're aiming. At what are you aiming? Our aim is the body as a whole and the kingdom as a whole. The body is composed of many parts, and each part constructed and shaped and gifted to perform a specific purpose for the entire body, particularly gifted for the general overall good. The eye is specifically and particularly designed to see. And when you study the science of it, lenses leading to neurons firing in the brain, it's a miracle. It's a wondrous miracle to think about. The ears are specifically and particularly designed to hear, yet their true value is performing the duty for the whole body. The particular values of each member are realized only when they correlate with the entire body. If the parts don't work together, the whole body suffers. But when they do, a mysterious and miraculous life is created and enhanced. Perhaps there's no greater example of unity and diversity than the human body, because our gifts have a common source and a common aim. But there are churches out there that ignore the gifts of the Spirit. I don't mean they say that out loud. They don't say it explicitly, we don't believe in the gifts of the Spirit. I mean they do it implicitly in their practices. They ignore the gifts of the Spirit by subordinating them to the machinery of the church. The pastor walks into the business meeting and he says, the nominating committee has an announcement. We need someone to teach the senior adult women. Who among us will teach the senior adult women in Sunday school? Silence in the room. You can hear the crickets chirping. Anyone? Anyone? And then there's a conversation that's rehearsed every single year. The people who are members of that church could almost recite it word for word. It goes the same way every single year. Somebody says, well, why don't we combine, since the women don't have a teacher, why don't we combine the senior adult women with the senior adult men? And one woman says, oh, I'm not about to have that. She said, they'll hit on us. I'm not going to go to Sunday. The lesson might be on sex. I don't want to be in Sunday school class with the men. And someone says, well, Florence Woodard's taught that class. Let's let Florence keep teaching the class. She's done it forever. And Florence smirks a little bit and blushes, and she kicks the ground and says, oh, shucks. She says, I'm not much of a teacher. And they say, oh, yeah, you're a good teacher. No, I can facilitate a discussion, but I'm not a teacher. But I guess I could do it one more year. It's been the same conversation for 40 years. I guess I could do it for one more year. You see what happens? That's the sort of things that happens in churches all over. That's the sort of thing that can happen in this church if we don't watch it. The pastor or the staff or the nominating committee presents a plea for help. We need someone to fill in this slot. And they're guilted into doing it. It's an art form. I took a seminary class on the art of pastoral guilt, and I can do it. The person agrees reluctantly to fill in the slot for a year, but they're not gifted. They don't enjoy it. Everyone around them is miserable because they're doing a bad job, but they're filling in the slot. And then they burn out so very easily because they weren't at a place where they could make use of their gifts. When you make the foot fit the shoe, it causes a great deal of pain. But what if we did things differently here? What if instead of making people fit into the slots, what if we made the slots fit into the gifts? What if rather than starting out saying, hey, we need somebody to do X, what if we started with the slots? What if we started with the gifts? What if we said, what do you care about? What are you good at? What are you passionate about? And if the Spirit hasn't gifted us in some particular way, maybe it's an indication we shouldn't be participating in that one particular thing. What if each part was free to use its God-given gift for the good of the whole church? And in the sharing of the gift, it becomes more, not less significant. For then the gift touches more than just you. It's used for communal edification and not just personal satisfaction. Each gift enters into this miraculous symbiotic relationship with all the other gifts, and suddenly, through the power of the Spirit, the whole becomes more than the sum total of the parts. It's the Spirit who animates the body. It's the Spirit that gives life to the church. But if we use our gifts, we are free to participate in the reality of the Spirit in this place. And each part is enriched, and so is the body. And in that way, the gifts keep on giving. And everyone has one. And by that, I mean everyone. I wish you could have seen it. You almost saw it this morning in the photos, but I wish you could have seen it. The day they handed out the sweaters to those children in that church, rural South Africa. It was in the early afternoon hours, probably 85 degrees out there. I was in a t-shirt and jeans sweating like crazy. And they gave the kids the sweaters, and the first thing the kids did was put them on. Winter's coming. Kids need sweaters. 85 degrees that day, though. They put them on. So proud of them. Multicolored, beautiful patterns. Children were so proud of them. School was dismissed. I saw those colorful sweaters meandering over the hills, each one going to their own home, proud of their sweater. And I asked Cheryl Allen, our host, I said, did you buy those sweaters? And she said, no, I didn't buy them. I said, they're beautiful, the patterns, colors and all. Where'd you get those sweaters? She said, no, I have a friend in Johannesburg, a member of my church, 82 years old. A few years ago, this 82-year-old lady came to me, and she said, Cheryl, what can I do? I'm 82, I'm not good at anything, I'm old, I don't feel like doing much. What can I do? And Cheryl did not say, well, I have this slot. You want to step into this slot? Cheryl said, what are you good at? What do you care about doing? And this lady said, well, I can sew, I can knit. And that 82-year-old lady in Johannesburg had knitted over 100 sweaters for the kids who were there that day. And I watched those sweaters run and jump and skip their way home, and I was reminded of this text. And I thought about that 82-year-old lady who I will never meet. Chances are those children will never meet her either. Do you know that every part of the body of Christ has been gifted by God for the good of the church, for the good of the kingdom? Every part of the church matters, every single one. I've been a pastor now for over 10 years. I've spent a lot of time in the church. Occasionally I'll say to the church, open your mouth and say, ah. And the church will do it. I've looked. Do you know, in the body of Christ, there are no tonsils? Because every part matters. Everyone. And so we come to the table. At the end of chapter 12, Paul says, and now I will show you a more excellent way. He says, let me show you the better gifts. And then he says, let me show you an even bester gift. Can we think about a more excellent way as we come to the table today? As our deacons come forward, we'll begin our time of communion. We have 3 stations of intinction up front, 2 stations of traditional elements in the back of the sanctuary, 1 station in the balcony of intinction. I would ask you, as you come to the table, to remind yourself of another gift. What we're about to participate in is sheer gift. All we bring to it is our open hands. It's sheer gift. He gives us His life, His body and blood, and somehow His body and blood becomes our body and blood. His life becomes intertwined with our lives. As you come to the table, think about that gift. But as you go back to your seats, I would remind you to think of it in one other way. If this is what Jesus did with His gifts, what are you doing with yours? What am I doing with mine? As you return to your gifts, to your seats, I would ask you to confess times that you've buried your gift. Times that you thought you've earned it. And I would ask you to celebrate God's grace and even look around this room and think about how you might use your gift in this place for God's glory and the world's good. As you come, think about His gift. And as you go back to your seat, think about yours. And above all, let's think about this more excellent way, the way of love.